And welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kish.
And tonight, the Surgeon General calls for warnings on social media.
Meanwhile, Netanyahu dissolves Israel's war cabinet.
And a doctor is indicted for blowing the whistle on trans surgeries. But first, President Biden, he's looking to capitalize on Trump's conviction in New York as his campaign released a new ad this week branding Trump as a convicted felon. Take a look at part of this.
In the courtroom, we see Donald Trump for who he is. He's been convicted of 34 felonies, found liable for sexual assault, and he committed financial fraud. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's been working, lowering health care costs and making big corporations pay their fair share.
The ad will run in every single swing state in hopes of dissuading more moderate voters from voting for Trump in the upcoming presidential election. And it just might end up working. A recent Politico poll shows 21% of independents said Trump's conviction would make them less likely to support him in November and will be an important factor in their vote as well. Although Politico does note that many Americans, about 43%, they question whether Trump actually received a fair trial, meaning how the verdict will affect the election in the long run. Well, that's still an open question.
Meanwhile, Biden's new Title IX regulations are facing a roadblock in 6 states. A federal judge in Kentucky ruled that the law, which would include expanded protections for LGBT students, is arbitrary in the truest sense of the word. The judge temporarily blocked the rule in Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. This comes only days after another judge blocked Biden's rule in Montana, Idaho, Mississippi, and Louisiana. According to ABC News, over 20 attorney generals in red states are challenging the Biden administration's added rule. Here's a snippet from Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Walters' earlier comment.
President Biden deciding to rewrite Title IX is one of the most radical and illegal moves we've ever seen from the federal government. It's an attack on our states, it's an attack on our families, and it's an attack on our young women and girls. We will not stand for this in Oklahoma. We are pursuing all actions to oppose this illegal and unconstitutional move by the Biden administration. We have already instructed our districts to not comply with this illegal rule change from President Biden.
The Department of Education summary says that schools must not discriminate against students based on gender identity, including in sex-separate activities. However, the statement also says that exceptions may apply to sports and living facilities.
And you would have to imagine, based on these current legal trends, that probably all 20 of the states suing are going to get some relief very soon.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Elsewhere, President Biden is announcing new protections specifically for illegal immigrants married to U.S. citizens. Sources tell PBS News that President Biden's new executive action will protect undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens from deportation, as well as allow them to obtain work authorizations and ease their path to permanent resident status. Should they meet all the necessary requirements, qualifying illegal immigrants will have about 3 years to apply to become permanent residents. The plan could affect up to 500,000 people.
And we talked about this earlier, that this seems like a very broad ruling, really. What do you make of that?
Well, it is important to note that this is coming, I believe, on the 12th anniversary of DACA. This is specifically for people who were brought into the United States illegally as children. So I imagine that's what the administration has in mind, to help legalize those people, which is controversial in and of itself. But you're right, this is very broad because it doesn't just include them. It could include just about any illegal immigrant married to a U.S. citizen. So yes, very
it's a
broad.
Slippery slope, it seems like, And speaking of immigration, a Chinese social media group is helping migrants take advantage of open borders. According to an exclusive report by the Daily Caller, the American self-guided tour channel on Telegram is encouraging migrants to enter the U.S. illegally. The Daily Caller found documents in the forum discussing Chinese illegal immigration and specific routes to the U.S. Tips also include dealing with Border Patrol agents and requesting asylum. The forum is run by a self-identified Chinese cyber police police officer who spreads CCP propaganda and bans accounts that do not align with the party's ideals. This comes as Border Patrol protection data shows that most of the 48,000 Chinese illegal immigrants encountered at the border this year have been single adult men. North Carolina Republican Representative Dan Bishop responded to the findings by saying, quote, "We're allowing an element that is completely beyond our law to be established firmly as a beachhead in the United States of America."
And speaking of social media, the U.S. government is growing more and more concerned about its impact on younger Americans. FISM's Ian Patrick has more.
The U.S. Surgeon General is taking mental health warnings regarding social media to a whole new level. In an opinion piece for the New York Times, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy makes the case that social media should come with a warning from his office. He writes, quote, "The mental health crisis among young people is an emergency, and social media has emerged as an important contributor. Adolescents who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media face double the risk of anxiety and depression symptoms, and the average daily use in this age group, as of the summer of 2023, was 4.8 hours. Additionally, nearly half of adolescents say social media makes them feel worse about their bodies." He then clarifies, quote, "It is time to require a Surgeon General's warning label on social media platforms, stating that social media is associated with significant mental health harms for adolescents." Now, putting such a label on social media would liken it to other products with other kinds of labels, such as cigarettes. In fact, citing studies from the Department of Health and Human Services, Murthy notes that such labels on tobacco are able to increase awareness and even change behavior, in his own words. In a similar vein, Murthy cites other research which showed that 76% of Latino parents willing to limit or monitor social use upon seeing a health warning. However, Murthy recognizes that a label on its own does not make social media safe for young people. Instead, Murthy actually references his own advisory, which he issued years ago. That advisory contains recommendations for policymakers, parents, and social media companies themselves. For policymakers, Murthy suggests stronger protections and developing health and safety standards for accessing social media sites. He also suggests that there should be more data privacy for children and having tech companies share data relevant to health impact from their platforms. And speaking of those companies, Murthy says that these companies should remain transparent in how their products affect children and teens. For parents, meanwhile, Murthy suggests creating a family media plan and maintaining open conversation on their child's social media use. It is worth noting that a Surgeon General's warning does require a legislative action from Congress in order to be implemented. Now, I should say both federal and state governments have recently been adamant on trying to regulate the power that social media giants such as X and Meta can wield. But it isn't clear if, despite all of these different legal battles, if putting such a Surgeon General warning on social media itself would be a priority in the current Congress. Regardless, many officials and experts hope that Congress will consider it. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
And thanks for that, Ian. Meanwhile, a U.S. appeals court will hear challenges to banning TikTok on September 16th. America has found itself in a conundrum over TikTok's legality after the FBI reported that the app poses a national security threat. The U.S. gave China until January 19th of next year to either sell the social media network to the U.S. or face a ban. But TikTok has argued that such an ultimatum is unconstitutional and not reasonable. To make matters more complicated, the CCP said they would block TikTok from being sold into American hands. At the same time, some members of Congress have questioned whether the government can impose legislation on a specific company and not on others. This was also a point echoed by TikTok. And we'll get into international news when we come back from this break.
Fear and uncertainty can cause us to hold things tightly and rely on ourselves. But during uncertain times, as believers in Christ, we are called to surrender fully to our sovereign God. The call to surrender to Jesus is one step in our growth in holiness. And it doesn't just mean you give over a few things. It means He gets it all, including our finances, our investments. Learn a biblically responsible investment strategy proven over 25 years. Keep the money God has entrusted to you out of companies that participate in things that God detests. Fully surrender. Become a Financial Issues Partner today. Learn more by going to financialissues.org/join. That's financialissues.org/join.
Saving the unborn is one of the most amazing things that we can do in this day and age. Hi, my name is Shanna Burt, host of Financial Issues. Would you go to preborn.org right now? Consider giving $140. That will allow 5 young mothers to hear the heartbeat of their baby and change their mind to choose life over abortion. Go to preborn.org. That's preborn.org. It's an incredible ministry, Preborn. We're fighting back through saving tens of thousands of lives. And Preborn doesn't just save the baby. They ask these young mothers to go through a program of evangelism so that their eternal lives might be saved as well. Would you come alongside us for the kingdom, for the glory of Christ? Go to preborn.org. That's preborn.org.
Hey there, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. Before we dive into international news today, we're going to take a look at the continued fallout from the anti-Israel protests on college campuses. Yesterday, the Department of Education said both City University of New York and the University of Michigan failed to address discrimination complaints amid the protests, along with other incidents as well. The two schools have now agreed to address those complaints, as failure to do so could result in a loss of federal funding. This comes as the DOE is also investigating similar complaints at schools across the country.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has officially dissolved his war cabinet following the exit of former military chief Benny Gantz. The move was very much expected. Netanyahu said he will now hold smaller advisory forums to discuss their conflict in Gaza. But he will most likely deal with hard-right members of his government who do not want a ceasefire. Throughout the war, Netanyahu has tried to balance demands from his own country as well as the U.S. Some have accused him of acting in his own political interests. Netanyahu has denied such allegations, but this doesn't change the fact that Gantz's departure from the war cabinet comes at a rather sensitive time in Israeli politics. Here's a former head of regional affairs at the Israeli NSC, Shiri Feingross, speaking on the issue.
Probably there will be, smaller debates headed by the prime minister, and he will go to the cabinet and actually ask them to give him the authority to decide on, the material decisions, so he won't have to go back each time to the cabinet. I hope this stops with soon and not turn into a very large-scale
real divisions in society.
And in other parts of the world today, Russian President Vladimir Putin is visiting North Korea today, marking his very first visit to that country in 24 years. Prior to his visit, Putin wrote an article published in North Korean state media. In that article, he praised Comrade Kim Jong-un and said the two of them will work together to resolutely oppose Western restrictions on their countries. In turn, North Korean state media praised Russia's war in Ukraine as what it called a sacred war of all Russian citizens. The U.S. State Department says it was, quote, quite certain that Putin is seeking weapons to support the war in Ukraine. The U.S. currently estimates that North Korea has already given Russia dozens of ballistic missiles and over 11,000 containers of munitions for the war effort in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, yesterday, a group of Russian warships left Cuba following a 5-day visit to the country's capital of Havana. The departure followed joint military drills between the two countries. The drills reportedly include simulating missile strikes on targets over 300 miles away. It is currently unknown where the vessels will be headed next. The State Department has speculated that the ships will dock in the Caribbean or Venezuela. Biden administration officials announced last week that they are monitoring the vessels and have sent ships to follow them. The visit by the Russian Navy to the Americas is believed to be a show of force in response to U.S. support of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Cuban government criticized the U.S. for docking a nuclear submarine at Guantanamo Bay during the joint exercises, calling the ship unwelcome and uninvited.
And in more maritime controversy, a Chinese vessel had a minor collision with a Philippine ship in a disputed area of the South China Sea yesterday. China's Coast Guard blamed the Philippine ship for the collision, which they say deliberately and dangerously approached despite repeated and stern warnings. The Philippines is disputing that claim, however, saying it was actually the Chinese ship that was making what they called dangerous maneuvers, including ramming and towing. The collision took place off the coast of the Second Thomas Shoal. That's a disputed area currently administered by the Philippines. Analysts have grown increasingly concerned over maritime disputes between the Philippines and China, warning that the conflict could escalate if left unchecked. In recent months, China has already taken steps to assert its claims over areas of the South China Sea, including allowing its Coast Guard to capture and detain foreigners.
Meanwhile, NATO members are stepping up defense spending to meet the alliance's target this year. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said yesterday that 23 alliance members will allocate 2% or more of their GDP towards defense spending.
That's more than twice as many as 4 years ago, and demonstrates that European allies and Canada are really stepping up and taking their share of the common responsibility to protect all of us in the NATO alliance.
The military spending target was put in place after Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, but countries were slow to meet that goal until the past couple of years after Moscow's latest aggression against Kyiv. And we have more news coming up next, but first let's go to Seth Yudinsky with a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Yudinsky. Well, the historian has to be ready to deal with controversial figures, and that comes with the territory, as perceptions of heroes and villains may change over the years and centuries. This is true with countless figures in history, many of whom we've studied, but perhaps none more than the famous or infamous Italian explorer from the 15th century who is credited with discovering the American landmass in the Western Hemisphere. Some call him a trailblazing hero and a crusader, while others decry him as a notorious genocidal scoundrel. Let's attempt to make sense of one of the most influential and controversial men in history, Christopher Columbus. Now, Columbus was born in 1451, the son of an Italian merchant with somewhat high status in the dying medieval feudal system of Europe. Columbus is seen by many as the historical hinge between the medieval age and the early modern world. He became a shipman early in life, and after settling in Spain as a young man, he was caught up in the contemporary popularity of the day to try to find a westward path to East Asia. Now, for Europeans, that would mean unrestricted access to the goods of Asia, where, remember, in the 15th century, the only known way to Asia at this time was either the painfully long voyage around the southern tip of Africa or through the treacherous deserts of the Middle East, which at the time were dominated by the Muslim Ottoman Empire. For the devout Catholic Columbus, that idea was less than agreeable. So he began to work through a plan with his navigational background to set sail westward and reach the East Asian coast via the Atlantic Ocean. He got little support from the European nobility until his plan reached the ears of the Spanish King Ferdinand and his Queen Isabella, who in 1492 had just completed the 700-year Christian reconquest of Spain from the Muslim Moors. With a combined fervor of religious zeal as well as a desire for riches and glory, the king and queen agreed to support an expedition westward with Columbus at the head. He was given 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, as well as an expeditionary force of Spanish knights. On August 3rd in 1492, Columbus set sail on the ocean blue. While he first thought he'd landed in the East Indies in October in that area, he actually landed in the Caribbean islands of Central America, where he encountered a land never before discovered by Europeans. Columbus established the European settlement of Hispaniola, and he was a trailblazing pioneer who is credited as the first European to discover the New World. That's with all due respect to the Viking Leif Erikson, who made it to Newfoundland in the 11th century. Yet Columbus is a marked figure, with many arguing he was a genocidal warlord who enslaved countless indigenous people. They say he was nothing but a villain who should be remembered as such. Now, how should we remember Columbus? Well, the truth is, like so many conquistadors and explorers of the age of discovery, he was a little bit of both. He was a devoutly religious man, a courageous leader, and most likely a glory and gold-hungry captain who was willing to compromise his character at times to achieve these things. Columbus himself summarized the daring nature of his quests with a quote where he said this: "Let those who are fond of blaming and finding fault while they sit safely at home ask, 'Why did you not do thus and so? I wish they were on this voyage.'" He would make several trips to and from the New World before his death in Spain in 1506. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
On the day I found I was pregnant, I was full of emotions, and I just was so overwhelmed, and I don't know if I'm ready for this huge, life-altering, changing commitment. I had individuals around me not wanting me to have this child. And somehow, and I was driving and I saw the Women's Help Center sign, and I immediately turned in. That just took relief off of me, and I was like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. They gave me the confidence and the support that I needed to be able to go out and face the world. First time I held Finnegan, I just lit up with joy. I was so excited. This little boy that I had in my life, he is loving and generous. Watching him just grow and flourish into this incredible human being has just been so rewarding and so uplifting. Looking back, I don't know what I would do without him, because I needed him more than I think he needed me.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kish. Well, a new study warns the U.S. is 15 years behind China's nuclear power generation. According to the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, China has invested heavily in nuclear power. There are currently 27 reactors under construction, twice the number of any other country. The nation is also building faster than any other country, with an average project time of 7 years. For comparison, the new Georgia Power reactor took 15 years to complete. The think tank projects that Beijing will overtake the U.S. to become the biggest producer of nuclear energy by the end of this decade. And in related news, China's nuclear arsenal is also expanding quickly, according to a separate report published this week. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute says that it's added 90 warheads this past year, a 20% increase to its stockpile.
Very concerning indeed. Meanwhile, in some troubling news back here in the U.S., the DOJ has finally unsealed its indictment against Dr. Item Haim, the whistleblower who exposed secret transgender procedures on kids at Texas Children's Hospital, something they publicly said they weren't doing. Dr. Haim was charged with a 4-count indictment in late May, according to the DOJ. Quote, in April 2023, Haim allegedly requested to reactivate his login access at TCH, that's the hospital, to access pediatric patients not under his care, and that he allegedly, quote, obtained unauthorized access to personal information of pediatric patients under false pretenses and later disclosed it to a media contact. Now, Haim denies any wrongdoing in this case, as he specifically redacted names and personal information when coming forward with his report. He says he's being targeted specifically for political purposes.
the largest children's hospital in the world, was lying about a program that was manipulating, mutilating, and sterilizing young, confused adolescent children. I am being targeted because I was a whistleblower.
Meanwhile, 3 Florida residents have pleaded guilty to targeting pregnancy centers. The Justice Department released a statement saying that the 3 individuals engaged in a series of targeted attacks on pro-life pregnancy help centers in Florida. The defendants admitted that they targeted the buildings at night, wearing masks and dark clothing. They spray-painted messages such as, quote, "If abortions aren't safe, then neither are you. Your time is up. We're coming for you. And we are everywhere." The FBI Tampa field office commented on their actions saying, quote, "We and our law enforcement partners will not tolerate those who conspire to attack facilities providing these lawful reproductive health services."
Now, the question is going to be, are these people ultimately going to be charged with what the pro-lifers are facing? Because you're seeing people who simply just block the entrances to a clinic and get jail time. So are these people who actually did violent things going to get charged with the same thing?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I hope that justice will be served truly.
That's right. And it's Florida, so maybe the FBI down there is going to push a little harder.
Hopefully.
Meanwhile, sweltering temperatures continue today, sadly, for the Ohio Valley and the lower Great Lakes, as that nasty heat dome settles over the region. The heat wave is already shattering records as we speak, and it's not done yet, as the National Weather Service says the high-pressure system creating this heat dome will continue to expand east and northeast. Some areas could see their hottest days in 30 years before that bubble finally breaks, which actually might not happen until next Sunday. This comes as dozens of labor and environmental groups are already asking the U.S. government to classify extreme heat and wildfire smoke as major disasters. A successful petition for this would grant federal emergency funds to help communities to help them beat the heat, which is something we desperately need this time of year.
Right, it's definitely heating up, so stay cool out there. And lastly, in sports, the Boston Celtics won the NBA championship on their home court last night. The team overcame the Dallas Mavericks in Game 5 of the finals, scoring 106-88. It's Boston's first title win since 2008 and follows multiple playoff heartbreaks since then. Here's star player Jason Tatum speaking on their victory.
It's a real feeling. Still hasn't really kicked in yet. Just trying, I guess, enjoy the moment. I kept saying, wow. These last 7 years have been a roller coaster, up and down. I had to listen to all that people said about me, and tonight it was worth it.
Last night was the Celtics' 18th title win. They now hold the record for NBA championships after surpassing the Los Angeles Lakers' 17 wins.
Very exciting for all the Celtics fan in the audience, so I'm
sure.
happy for them.
Yeah. Well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for more updates until tomorrow's show, be sure to check us out on social media. Type in FISM News on your favorite platform, or you can download the FISM app. Thanks so much. God bless, and we'll catch you tomorrow with more news.